The wind sweeping across the high plains of Laramie, Wyoming, carries with it a profound stillness. It is a landscape defined by vast, open skies, rugged terrain, and a quiet, resilient community. In the autumn of 1998, this peaceful college town, home to the University of Wyoming, became the focal point of a tragedy that would irrevocably alter the course of American legal history. This is the story of a brilliant young man, a meticulous and rapid police investigation, a landmark trial, and a grieving family that channeled their unimaginable loss into a nationwide movement for justice. It is a testament to the power of forensic science, the dedication of law enforcement, and the enduring quest for a more equitable society. Matthew Wayne Shepard was 21 years old, a young man of slight stature but possessing a towering intellect and an expansive worldview. Born in Casper, Wyoming, Matthew had spent his formative years traveling the globe. Because of his father's career in the oil industry, the Shepard family had lived in Saudi Arabia, and Matthew had attended the American school in Switzerland. He was multilingual, deeply empathetic, and harbored a passionate interest in political science and foreign relations. His ultimate aspiration was to work for the United States State Department, dedicating his life to human rights and diplomacy. Those who knew him described a bright, trusting individual, with a quick smile and a desire to make the world a more accepting place. However, Matthew also navigated the world with a certain vulnerability, seeking connection and community in a society that was not always welcoming. In the late evening hours of Tuesday, October 6, 1998, Matthew visited the Fireside Lounge, a local establishment in Laramie. It was an ordinary Tuesday night in a university town. Also present at the lounge were 21-year-old Aaron McKinney and 21-year-old Russell Henderson. The two men, local laborers with histories of petty offenses, noticed Matthew. What unfolded next was a calculated deception. Recognizing that Matthew was looking for companionship and understanding, McKinney and Henderson falsely presented themselves as gay men to gain his trust. Their stated intention, as later revealed in police interrogations, was to lure him away from the public setting under the guise of friendship, with the premeditated goal of committing a robbery. Trusting their demeanor, Matthew accepted a ride in McKinney's pickup truck. Once inside the vehicle, the situation rapidly and tragically escalated. McKinney and Henderson drove away from the illuminated streets of Laramie, heading east into a desolate, rural area of Albany County. During this drive, the robbery commenced. When Matthew realized the peril he was in, the encounter turned into a brutal assault. The perpetrators drove out to a remote prairie location, characterized by rolling dirt roads and traditional wooden buck and rail fences used to mark property lines. Upon arriving at this isolated spot, the perpetrators forced Matthew from the vehicle. What occurred next was an unprovoked and severe physical attack. The perpetrators utilized a heavy, large-caliber Smith & Wesson revolver as a blunt instrument. Matthew sustained catastrophic blunt force trauma to his head and face, resulting in multiple severe fractures and profound neurological damage. Following the assault, McKinney and Henderson bound Matthew's hands behind his back, securing him to the wooden buck fence. They removed his wallet, his shoes, and other personal items, leaving him incapacitated and exposed to the harsh, near-freezing overnight temperatures of the Wyoming autumn. They then fled the scene in the pickup truck, leaving Matthew alone in the darkness. For 18 hours, Matthew remained undiscovered on the prairie. The temperatures dropped significantly, and his medical condition deteriorated due to the combination of severe head trauma and profound hypothermia. On the evening of Wednesday, October 7th, a young man named Aaron Kreifels was riding his mountain bike through the rural area. He had taken a fall from his bike and, upon standing up to dust himself off, noticed what he initially believed to be a scarecrow tied to the fence in the distance. As he approached, the harrowing reality became clear. It was not a scarecrow, but a young man in critical condition. Kreifels immediately rushed to the nearest house to contact emergency services. initiating a rapid response from Albany County law enforcement and medical personnel. The first officer to arrive on the scene was Albany County Sheriff's Deputy Reggie Flutie. The scene she encountered was deeply distressing, yet she maintained absolute professional composure. Matthew was completely unresponsive, his breathing labored. Deputy Flutie immediately began administering emergency first aid, working to clear his airway while waiting for paramedics. During this life-saving effort, Deputy Flutie was exposed to Matthew's blood, an occupational hazard that later required her to undergo preventative medical treatments, underscoring the immediate personal risks taken by first responders. Paramedics arrived and initiated advanced life support protocols. Given the severity of his neurological injuries, Matthew was quickly transported to Ivinson Memorial Hospital in Laramie before being transferred to the specialized intensive care unit at Poudre Valley Hospital in Fort Collins, Colorado. Upon admission, medical professionals determined that Matthew had sustained massive damage to his brainstem. The blunt force trauma was so severe that surgical intervention was deemed impossible. Matthew was placed on life support, entering a deep medical coma. As the medical team in Colorado fought to stabilize him, his parents, Dennis and Judy Shepard, who were working in Saudi Arabia at the time, received the devastating phone call. They immediately boarded flights to rush across the globe to their son's bedside, beginning an agonizing vigil that would capture the attention of the world. Parallel to the medical emergency, a remarkably swift and efficient police investigation was already unfolding back in Laramie. The apprehension of the suspects did not take weeks or months, but mere hours, thanks to aggressive police work and the reckless behavior of the perpetrators themselves. Shortly after abandoning Matthew on the prairie, McKinney and Henderson returned to Laramie. Still operating in a state of violent agitation, the two men became involved in a separate, unrelated physical altercation with two young Hispanic men near the downtown area. During this second confrontation, McKinney sustained a head injury. Laramie Police Department officer Flint Waters responded to the report of this street fight. When Officer Waters arrived, he encountered McKinney and Henderson. Officer Waters, demonstrating exceptional situational awareness, noticed blood inside the cabin of McKinney's pickup truck. He also observed a large-caliber Smith & Wesson revolver in plain view. At this exact moment, the Laramie Police Department had not yet connected these two men to the critical incident out on the prairie, as Matthew had only just been discovered. However, recognizing the suspicious nature of the blood and the weapon, Officer Waters secured the vehicle and the individuals. When the call came in regarding the discovery of a severely injured young man tied to a fence, investigators immediately began connecting the dots. The Albany County Sheriff's Office, led by Commander Dave O'Malley and Detective Rob Debris, took charge of the investigation. They quickly realized that the bloody pickup truck and the revolver found by Officer Waters were likely the key to the horrific crime on the prairie. The forensic investigation that followed was a textbook example of meticulous evidence collection and analysis. In 1998, DNA profiling was becoming a highly reliable and heavily utilized tool in criminal justice. Investigators obtained search warrants for the pickup truck, the suspects' residences, and the clothing they were wearing. The Wyoming State Crime Laboratory took possession of the evidence. Forensic serologists examined the interior of the truck. Using chemical reagents like luminol to detect trace amounts of blood, they mapped the passenger cabin. They found significant blood evidence on the passenger seat, the door panel, and the dashboard. Swabs were taken and sent for DNA analysis. Furthermore, the heavy Smith & Wesson revolver recovered from the truck was heavily stained with biological material. The application of Locard's exchange principle, a foundational concept of forensic science, which states that every contact leaves a trace, was fully evident in this case. Not only was Matthew's blood found inside the suspect's vehicle and on the weapon, but fibers from Matthew's clothing were also identified in the truck. Investigators also turned their attention to the suspect's associates. They discovered that McKinney's girlfriend, Chastity Pasley, and Henderson's girlfriend, Kristen Price, had actively participated in attempting to cover up the crime. Following the assault, the two women had helped dispose of evidence, specifically hiding the bloody clothing and the shoes belonging to the perpetrators. Law enforcement officers executed search warrants and successfully recovered these items. Forensic footwear analysts compared the tread patterns of the recovered shoes to impressions left in the dirt at the crime scene, finding consistent matches that placed the suspects exactly where Matthew was found. Faced with an overwhelming mountain of physical and forensic evidence, the police brought McKinney and Henderson in for formal interrogation. Detective Rob Debris, known for his methodical and relentless interviewing style, led the questioning. Initially, the suspects offered conflicting stories and attempted to minimize their involvement. However, as detectives systematically presented the forensic evidence, the bloody gun, the DNA matches, and the recovered clothing, the suspects' narratives began to fracture. During these interrogations, the true motive and the chilling details of the deception were admitted on tape. The suspects confessed to pretending to be gay to lure Matthew out of the bar. They admitted to the robbery and the subsequent assault. The audio recordings of these interrogations would later become crucial pieces of evidence, cementing the premeditated nature of the crime and the explicit targeting of the victim based on his sexual orientation. While the investigation swiftly locked down the perpetrators, the medical reality in Fort Collins was reaching a heartbreaking conclusion. Despite the tireless efforts of the neurological team at Poudre Valley Hospital, Matthew's condition did not improve. His brain injuries were simply too catastrophic. On Monday, October 12, 1998, surrounded by his loving family, Matthew Shepard passed away. The death of Matthew Shepard sent a shockwave across the United States and around the globe. Laramie, Wyoming, a quiet town known for its university and beautiful landscapes, suddenly found itself at the epicenter of a massive international media storm. Satellite trucks lined the streets, and reporters from every major news network descended upon the community. The brutal nature of the crime, juxtaposed against the serene backdrop of the Wyoming plains, created a profound national dissonance. The American public was forced to confront the dark reality of anti-gay violence in a way it never had before. This period also saw the emergence of intense public demonstrations. The tragedy attracted the attention of the Westboro Baptist Church, a fundamentalist group known for its extreme anti-homosexual rhetoric. Members of this group traveled to Wyoming to picket Matthew's funeral and the subsequent trials, holding highly offensive signs and attempting to disrupt the mourning process. However, this hateful presence sparked a beautiful and enduring counter-movement. A friend of Matthew's, Romaine Patterson, conceptualized what became known as angel action. Volunteers constructed massive, flowing white angel costumes with wings large enough to block the hateful signs from view. These angels stood in silent, peaceful formation around the courthouse and the memorial services, creating a visual barrier of love and protection between the grieving community and the protesters. This powerful imagery of silent angels standing against hatred became one of the most iconic symbols of the era, showcasing the community's absolute rejection of bigotry. With the perpetrators in custody and the evidence secured, the focus shifted to the Albany County Courthouse. The legal proceedings were led by prosecuting attorney Cal Rarucha. The state charged both Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson with kidnapping, aggravated robbery, and first-degree murder. At the time, Wyoming did not possess a state-level hate crimes law that covered sexual orientation, meaning the prosecution had to rely strictly on the standard criminal statutes to secure justice, while still ensuring the jury understood the context and the targeted nature of the attack. Recognizing the insurmountable weight of the forensic evidence and the high probability of receiving the death penalty, Russell Henderson's legal counsel advised him to seek a plea agreement. In April of 1999, Henderson pleaded guilty to murder and kidnapping. By accepting responsibility and avoiding a trial, he avoided the possibility of execution. The presiding judge sentenced Henderson to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. Aaron McKinney, however, chose to take his case to trial. His trial commenced in October of 1999, a year after the crime. The prosecution presented a meticulous and devastating case. They walked the jury through the timeline, utilizing the testimony of the bartender at the Fireside Lounge, the responding officers, and the forensic experts. The jury was shown the blood evidence from the truck, the DNA profiles matching Matthew, and the chilling audio recordings of McKinney's own police interrogation. Faced with indisputable physical evidence of his client's actions, McKinney's defense attorneys attempted a highly controversial legal strategy known as the gay panic defense. They argued that McKinney had been driven to temporary insanity by an alleged unwanted sexual advance from Matthew, claiming this triggered violent childhood trauma and caused him to lash out uncontrollably. This defense strategy was met with intense legal pushback. The prosecution argued vigorously that the attack was clearly a premeditated robbery and a cold-blooded murder, not a spontaneous act of panic. They pointed to the fact that the perpetrators had actively lured Matthew, driven him to a remote location, and robbed him, actions that require planning and clear intent. Presiding Judge Barton Voigt made a definitive and historic ruling. He barred the defense from utilizing the gay panic argument, stating that it was not a recognized defense under Wyoming law, and that the evidence clearly pointed to a calculated crime rather than a momentary loss of control. Stripped of their primary defense strategy, McKinney's legal team had little to offer against the prosecution's forensic avalanche. After hearing all the evidence, the jury deliberated and returned a verdict of guilty on all charges, including felony murder, kidnapping, and aggravated robbery. Following the conviction, the trial moved to the penalty phase, where the jury would decide whether McKinney should be sentenced to death or life in prison. It was during this phase that one of the most profound and moving moments in American legal history occurred. Dennis Shepard, Matthew's father, addressed the court to deliver a victim impact statement. Dennis Shepard stood before the judge, the jury, and the man who had taken his son's life. He spoke of Matthew's dreams, his kindness, and the agonizing void his death had left in their family. He spoke of the horror of knowing his son had been tied to a fence, alone in the cold. But then, in a stunning display of grace and moral fortitude, Dennis Shepard addressed the issue of the death penalty. He stated that while McKinney deserved to die for what he had done, the Shepard family was not seeking vengeance. Dennis Shepard told the court that they were granting McKinney his life, not out of mercy for the killer, but in memory of Matthew, who would not have wanted another life taken. Dennis Shepard looked directly at McKinney and delivered a powerful message, stating that McKinney would now have a long time to sit in a cell and reflect on the fact that he owed his life to the very person whose life he had destroyed. Based on the family's wishes, the prosecution agreed not to pursue the death penalty. The judge sentenced Aaron McKinney to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The immediate legal justice was served. Both perpetrators were permanently removed from society, locked away in maximum security facilities for the rest of their natural lives. The accomplices, Chastity Pasley and Kristen Price, also pleaded guilty to charges of being accessories after the fact and served time in prison. The Albany County Sheriff's Office and the Laramie Police Department were commended for their flawless, rapid investigation that left no legal loopholes for the defense to exploit. However, the conclusion of the trials was merely the beginning of Matthew Shepard's enduring legacy. The Shepard family, recognizing that their tragedy had exposed a glaring flaw in the American legal system, refused to let their son's name be synonymous only with victimhood. They founded the Matthew Shepard Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting diversity, tolerance, and understanding through education and advocacy. Judy Shepard became a tireless public speaker, traveling the country to share Matthew's story and to advocate for the protection of marginalized communities. The most significant legislative outcome of this tragedy was the decade-long battle to change federal law. At the time of Matthew's murder, Federal hate crime legislation only covered crimes motivated by race, color, religion, or national origin. It did not provide federal resources or enhanced penalties for crimes motivated by a victim's sexual orientation, gender, or disability. Furthermore, the existing laws severely limited the jurisdiction of federal law enforcement to assist local agencies in these matters. The Shepard family, alongside civil rights organizations and countless advocates, lobbied Congress relentlessly. They faced significant political opposition, with various lawmakers arguing against expanding federal jurisdiction or citing concerns over freedom of speech, despite the legislation strictly targeting violent physical acts, not words. The proposed bill, named the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, was introduced and debated across multiple legislative sessions. James Byrd Jr. was an African-American man brutally murdered in a racially motivated hate crime in Texas the same year as Matthew, and their names were forever linked in the pursuit of justice. Finally, after 11 years of steadfast advocacy, the political tides shifted. In October of 2009, the United States Congress passed the legislation. On October 28, 2009, President Barack Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act into federal law. This landmark legislation fundamentally updated the legal framework of the United States. It expanded the federal definition of hate crimes to include violence based on gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. Crucially, it removed the prerequisite that the victim be engaging in a federally protected activity, such as voting or attending school, for the federal government to intervene. It also provided the Department of Justice with the authority to step in and assist local and state jurisdictions in investigating and prosecuting these complex, resource-intensive crimes, ensuring that no community would have to face such a profound legal burden alone. The murder of Matthew Shepard was a dark chapter that forced a nation to look in the mirror. It highlighted the devastating consequences of prejudice and the deep societal fractures that allow hatred to manifest into violence. But the response to his death, the meticulous pursuit of justice by law enforcement, the dignified resilience of the Shepard family, and the eventual passage of federal legislation proved that society has the capacity to heal, to evolve, and to protect its most vulnerable members. Today, Matthew's legacy is woven into the fabric of the American legal system and the ongoing cultural shift toward acceptance and equality. His story is taught in universities, his name is enshrined in federal law, and his spirit lives on in the countless individuals who continue to advocate for a world where no one is targeted for simply being who they are. As we reflect on the incredible forensic work that secured the convictions and the monumental legal changes that followed, we are left to consider our own roles within our communities. How do we, in our daily lives, continue the work of dismantling prejudice before it takes root, ensuring that the justice achieved in the courtroom is reflected in the safety and acceptance found on our streets?